Hello again and welcome to another video on rowing technique. Now in some previous episodes we've looked at the drive phase of the stroke and the recovery in terms of the power production, the use of legs, trunk, arms, and also the way that we have to go through the recovery sequences and that sort of thing. But there's a bit more to it because we also need to think about how to move and how fast and how slow, how the boat's behaving and so on. So this time I'm going to have a look at timing and time, and they're slightly different things, but as we get started on it I'm sure you'll understand what I mean. Okay, so let's talk about timing first of all. There are really three kinds of timing. The first one is the obvious one, where you've got a crew of people who are trying to row in time with each other. So we all come forwards, we want all the oars to go in together, push through and come out together. That kind of timing. So not only about the oars but about the sequences and movements through the recovery and through the drive, just people staying in time. That's pretty obvious. The second one is about being in time with the boat itself. So, for instance, all of those people, let's say it's an 8, they could be rowing in time together, but they could all be getting ahead of the boat because they're rushing, like this, or if they're a bit stiff and clumsy off the back turn, they might actually get behind the boat in terms of the boat is trying to surge through and they're not letting it because they're slumped or locked out here in the knees. So that's the second kind of timing, and it's important actually in an 8 that people feel the boat well and get their timing from the hull, because there's obviously only one hull and there's 8 people moving up and down, so 8 people randomly trying to work out how to be in time with each other is quite tricky. But if they all feel the hull the same way, then the hull effectively is the timing reference for them. The third kind of timing is being in time with yourself in a single scull or in a crew boat like an 8, because a very typical fault is that we come forwards in rowing and the stretcher is here, is coming, and we get there and the blade is still in the air, and once the legs have reached full compression they'll just do one thing, which is begin to go the other way. They won't want to wait. So it's very common that people are out of time with themselves. In other words, their feet and their hands, or their feet and the oar, are not in time. So we want to time the oar into the water so that as the stretcher comes there, the blade is in, and as we push against the oar there. What we don't want to do is to arrive, push, and then enter. But that's pretty common. So 3 kinds of timing. We need to get those right, obviously. But there's also the aspect of time, which is the other thing I want to talk about in this episode. Okay, so why is time important? Well, obviously it's a key component of rhythm. So assuming that our timing is good and we can all begin here, if we can create a stroke which has got ratio, so it's got some acceleration and some recovery, acceleration and recovery, a sense of time is reassuring, and that means that the crew can be relaxed, have a sense of control. That means that we can make our movements like squaring and entering cleaner, more competent. And conversely, of course, if we're a bit short of time because it's heavy and then we're chasing it and it's heavy and we're chasing it, then those kind of movements become more abrupt, less skillful, and there are more errors involved. So we need to have time in the stroke. But I think a really important principle or buy-in is that we need to create time, not take it, but to create it. So if we have good acceleration here and a good movement through the first bit of the recovery here, the boat will glide back to us and the boat will effectively do the work. If we don't accelerate enough or we don't recover the first part well, then we have to go to the boat, and that means that it's less relaxed, we've got less control, things happen in a more compressed time frame, and again we're hurried. So we need to generate time, and through the acceleration, through the first part of the recovery, and it's something that we earn the right, if you like, by doing good, honest work, but also moving well together in the recovery. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that as well. I want to put some numbers on this so that we get a sense of what does it really mean. So if we row at rate 20 quite steadily, 20 strokes a minute is obviously one stroke cycle every 3 seconds, like this. And if we're just rowing quite steadily, we're probably going to have something like 1 second in the water during the power phase and maybe 2 seconds in the recovery, just for simple numbers. So a 2-to-1 ratio, and that would give us a good sense of time, no problem. The thing is, when we go firm or up to race pace, things change a lot. So if at rate 20 we've got 3 seconds to do all of our movements, at rate 40 we've got half of that, a second and a half. So clearly it's going to be more of a challenge for us. Even at rate 30 we're down to 2 seconds. I think a really interesting aspect, which I found it a little difficult to get my own head around really, is this, which is that the drive time when we're at race pace and the drive time when we're rowing firm at lower rate is about the same. So if I row rate 24, let's get into it. If I row 24 with pressure, my drive time is about the same as it is at race pace, let's say at rate 36. So rate 24, rate 36, if you're going firm, the drive time is about the same, and it'll be about something like 0.7 of a second. The drive time varies a bit, obviously. In sculling it could be 0.8 of a second, in an 8 it might be as little as 0.6. So just take 0.7 as a number to illustrate the point. There's our drive time, 0.7 of a second. Now, at rate 24, our stroke cycle takes 2.5 seconds. So if we take the 0.7 away from that, at rate 24 we've got 1.8 seconds to recover. Still plenty of time. But at rate 40, if we've got 0.7 in the water, we've got 0.8 in the recovery. We've lost a whole second. I hope, I mean, I'm not great at maths, but I hope we can all sort of follow that. The recovery is what shrinks massively. The power phase changes a tiny bit. And the reason, or a couple of reasons why that's the case, is that whether I'm rowing at rate 24 or at rate 36, the distance the handle travels is about the same, so that's not really going to change. The boat speed, surprisingly, is only a bit lower. So at rate 24, our hull speed would typically be something like 85%, 86% of our top speed. So if we take rate 36 as being our 100% race pace, then at rate 24 firm, we'll be achieving something like 85 or 86% of that race pace. So we can see actually that the hull speed's quite high already at rate 24, and the drive time therefore is fairly close to race pace drive time. But as I've already said, the recovery reduces massively. So I guess it's kind of obvious what the problems are. If we're short of time, it feels rushed and it's difficult to row properly, basically. But what about some solutions? I think in terms of learning how to create time and appreciate time in the rowing stroke better, there are really two ways. One is that we slow things down to make life easier. The other is that we speed it up and we actually give people less time. So we sort of use almost two extremes in the learning process. And the brain responds quite well to both. If we always just slow things down, it just is too easy. But if we always make it really, really fast, then we might not ever take those learning steps. So an example of slowing things down would be to do just low rate rowing. So that might mean rowing at 16 or lower, lower than we'd normally paddle. It could mean putting in some pauses, so pause here just to check, am I where I think I am in the stroke here? Hands away, body over, those basic sequencing exercises. Counting for less experienced rowers is quite useful, and sometimes coxes use that. So you might say it's like 1, 2 for the drive phase, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the recovery, so you get people thinking about ratio. Other exercises which we might do would be within a sort of normal rowing speed, might be to, for instance, come out of the water, go onto the feather, move away, go back to the square, feather again, and back to the square for a second time. So in other words, we're adding in an extra feathering, squaring movement. Or mid-stroke, we're here in the recovery, blade off the water, push the handle down, handle up, handle down, and carry on. So we've got that sense of control. The handle's where it should be. I've got control of the weight of it and the movement here. So there's exercises that we can put in like that. What else? Another one which people do sometimes is off the finish, the sweep. They sometimes move away with one hand and take the other hand over the top, and it lands back on the handle just as you reach front stop. So it's sort of making one movement relate to another movement down here. It's all about just creating these linkages in the brain, really. Now, the other one, obviously, is to speed things up. So we can make things challenging if we go quickly off the front like this. That's rate 70 at the end. I mean, that's way higher than we're ever going to have to row in the boat. But it's just a way of getting things moving, reminding those faster twitch movements, how it feels at speed. Obviously on the back end, we can go arms only as well. Finished at 93 there. You know, it's not that difficult, but it's useful to remind the arms that they can move that fast. So if we're trying to move a bit more fluidly from, let's say, 34 to 35, one pip, well, we know that we've been 3 times that on that drill. Another exercise is to row reverse rhythm, which I think you do with a bit of care because it teaches effectively a bad rhythm, but it would be quite light through the stroke here and then fast forwards. That one is quite useful because obviously you're not doing any work, so you don't get tired, but you're moving quickly through the recovery phase, so you're sort of trying to replicate how you think you might have to move if you were piling along at, you know, at full rate, full pace, full pressure, but without doing the work. And of course a really obvious one is if you're perhaps used to training in a slower boat type like a single scull or a coxless pair, you just go to a faster boat, you go to a quad or an 8. And that's the equivalent of, say, cyclists who do speed training by spinning along in a lighter gear. Runners run downhill to do their overspeed training. In rowing it's tricky because you can't row faster than we can row, but we can go into faster boat types, we can shorten down the slide, we can get faster movements going through those sorts of ideas, and by doing that we get a sense of the time that's available and how we're using the time. So I hope that's been useful. I think what this leads us into maybe next time will be a chat about rhythm, because rhythm is obviously the big one, and something that every boat wants to have a good rhythm. So let's look at that next time.